And this collection contains over 6,000 items, including books, photographs, real photo postcards, newspapers, cartoons, ephemera, all about or related to the invasion of the U.S. invasion of Veracruz in 1914. And one of the major photographers in that collection is Walter Elias Hadsell, who's shown here. And he graduated from University of Arizona with a mining engineer degree, and he quickly moved to Mexico, and this was in 1906. He was always interested in photography and was influenced by pictorialism, which is a type of photography that has a painterly look, as you can see from these images. And in 1911, he moved to Veracruz, and this is his storefront here. And so he owned the Kodak franchise in Veracruz, and so this was a photography business that he had. And so he was there in 1914 when the U.S. bombarded the city. And so to help curate this exhibition, I worked with Dr. Michael Miller, and together we looked through the entire collection and produced what you'll see in these two galleries that are behind us, the tile gallery. So we hope you have a chance to walk through after the talk. And there'll also be opportunity to ask questions after Dr. Miller's talk. And so to introduce him, we have Dr. Miller, who's a retired professor of Mexican cultural history, and he holds a PhD from Texas A&M University. He recently published his first novel, The Two Deaths of Father Romero, and he is also the author of Red, White, and Green, The Maturing of Mexicanidad. And his books, along with the book about Hadsell, Witness to War, are all sold in our bookshop. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Miller.
Thank you, Carla. I'm really honored to be here today to put into historical context all of these 6,000 items, especially the ones that we have in the gallery today. It is, of course, a very generous gift. You can't have a great collection, a great museum, without a great benefactor. So I appreciate Susan very much. Where is she? She's done something really great with her gift to the Wittliff. As you begin your tour of the gallery, you're going to see what Veracruz looked like prior to the incursion of the American military. It was a very peaceful place. It had a unique role to play in Mexican cultural history. It's an area where Afro-Mexicans are very prevalent, and the culture is very much tied into the Caribbean. This was a dance that took place a few months before the invasion. It's called the danzón. It's a Cuban dance that was brought to Veracruz, and it's a very stately dance. The people are very, very proper, and when they do it, it's a very, very beautiful dance to see. In fact, there's a perfect example. This couple right here are doing the danzón as it's supposed to be performed. Now, the story begins with Hadsell, and the very first gallery is devoted to his work. And then we go into the second gallery, which is devoted mainly to the invasion. And it's got pictures of what it looks like to see a city that's bombarded, that is basically undefended. And the pictures in the gallery, all of the materials in the gallery, will show you what happened. But we really this morning want to focus on why it happened. Why did this invasion take place? I'm going to suggest that there are several possibilities why this unfortunate and bizarre event took place. First, and this is sort of a leitmotif in American history, a recurring theme, regime change. In the maelstrom of the Mexican Revolution, the man whom President Wilson, who was the president of the U.S., thought would be the best and friendliest person to relate to the United States was murdered. Madero was a wealthy rancher, something of a mystic, rather naive. He had his hacienda at a place called Pares de la Fuente, and it's still there today. It's a vineyard. You can go there, and it's very good wine. After a very short time in office, he was murdered. He was assassinated by a very violent general by the name of Victoriano Huerta, and that made President Wilson very, very angry and upset. So obviously, he couldn't work with his ambassador in Mexico City, a man named Henry Lane Wilson, because he was more or less implicated in Madero's assassination. So the diplomatic route to a solution to this problem was closed, and they had to begin, we have to begin to look at other reasons. And the second reason is one that's also something of a leitmotif in American culture: white supremacy. All people of color were viewed as inferior. Indigenous tribes, former slaves, Filipinos, Chinese, Japanese, Mexicans, Mexican Americans, were all simply in the view of the American government, people who needed to be kept in their place. So in April of 1914, we can only describe a moment of hysteria. The press was whipping up a lot of anger and fear about Mexico and the possibility of incursions by Mexicans into the U.S. or misbehavior among Mexicans. And the press was whipped up. In Texas, and this sounds somewhat familiar, Governor Oscar B. Colquitt, for whom nothing is named that I know of, became obsessed with border protection. And his idea was to deputize 100 Texas Rangers to go down and seize all the Mexican cities from Ojinaga to Matamoros. Regime change. This hysteria became something of a national obsession. The newspapers went crazy when a group of sailors who were coming off one of the ships from the Atlantic Fleet that was already there came ashore in a longboat, and it's quite possible they were trying to figure out who was running the city of Tampico, whether it was the Huerta, the person whom Wilson hated, or was it possibly Carranza, who was coming along as another leader who eventually succeeds in defeating. Huerta had invited, or was connected to, a German ship that had a load of American-made Remington rifles. And the Wilson administration believed that this ship was coming to bring those rifles to Huerta. And so that was the reason the sailors went ashore, probably, to find out if Tampico was in the hands of Huerta. Tampico was the destination for the ship, or whether Carranza had already taken over. Well, they were arrested, and they were very quickly released, but the admiral of the fleet that was standing off the coast of Mexico demanded that Huerta and the Mexican authorities give a 21-gun salute to the American flag, and Huerta refused. And so that was the pretext for the invasion. Wilson refused the apology. He took the fact that there was an affront from the Mexicans, how dare they, to the Congress, and the Congress voted to support his actions. His actions were what you will see in the second gallery, you'll start with a picture of the peaceful Danzón, and then you'll begin to see what happened when the entire Atlantic fleet, the Pacific fleet, stood off the western coast of Mexico, and there was a boarding party that came ashore. And back home, things just went wild. There were all kinds of sheet music and entertainers talking about this invasion of Mexico to teach the Mexicans, and so the troops began to arrive. Now, the brouhaha over the German arms shipment was probably one of the reasons that they really got involved. It spooked the American government to think that the Germans were going to become involved in the lives of our neighbors to the south. The Kaiser was very active already in Europe. This is 4 months before the beginning of the First World War. So there was a lot of interest in what Germany was doing. And this was kind of a provocative act, this ship that was bringing arms into Mexico. The military began to try to figure out what they were going to do, and they began practicing things, combined naval tactics, electronic communications, mobile transportation, the use of new equipment like airplanes, and it's entirely possible that this was one of the reasons. This hysteria really gave the energy that was almost unstoppable once it got started. There was also a large number of American workers in Mexico who were working in the oil and gas and mineral industry, and they were worried about their safety. And these mines and this mineral activities were controlled by wealthy Americans in the United States. And it could be that there was some sense in which they thought that this invasion should take place because it had worked once before. There had been an uprising in the Sonoran city of Cananea in 1906, and the Arizona Rangers took a train down to Cananea and took over the city. So there was a kind of a possibility that this was something that had been done before, and they were going to try to replicate it. But they did it, and it was sort of an unfortunate experience because they came ashore. The Blue Jackets, the armed sailors, were the first to come, and then the Marines, and they walked in a kind of formation thinking that there would be no opposition because there was really no military presence in the city other than a naval academy. And the city had been basically deserted by the Mexican military authorities, but the soldiers came under sniper fire. The citizens of the city decided that they would not allow this to happen, and they began taking pot shots at the soldiers and the sailors and the Marines, and that precipitated this enormous military activity that included a bombardment. You'll see photographs of some of the buildings that were destroyed. There were casualties among the Mexicans, especially poignant were the deaths of some of the naval cadets who stood up and tried to fight back. The occupation lasted for about a year and, of course, was dropped from the headlines when World War I began. So those are some of the possible reasons, but in actual fact, nobody really knows why they did this rather unusual thing. The incursion into Veracruz was quickly forgotten with the beginning of World War I, a cataclysm in which, before it ended, 60 million people were killed. So I've tried to be succinct about this and give us plenty of time for questions because the why of this is the major question that historians struggle with. Why did we do this? What did we accomplish? Why is it now a part of the kind of bitterness that exists in Mexico against American behavior? How did it relate to the fact that we've tried to involve ourselves in Latin America for nearly every generation since this event without ever learning that that probably is not going to be what we need to do in the long run? I'd like now to let you have some questions, because I think that may be the most effective way of understanding what happened. Are there any questions?
Two questions. How many people eventually were killed in this provocation? And then early on, you mentioned there's somebody going to take from all of the border towns, some group of, did you say Arizona Border Patrol or somebody was going to?
Well, Arizona had an organization modeled on the Texas Rangers, and Arizona was a territory, hadn't become a state, and so I guess the governor of the territory of Arizona received word that the American-owned factory in Cananea in Sonora, which is just south of Arizona, was under attack. Of course, they weren't. It was just a labor dispute. But they panicked, and they loaded up a train with Arizona Rangers, and they came down, and they took control of the city. And there was a little bit of gunfire, not too much. And eventually, they were ordered to leave and to go back. That may have been the inspiration for Governor Colquitt, thinking that he could send the Texas Rangers into Mexico, seize these Mexican cities on the border, and that would be a wall between the United States and Mexico. As far as casualties, Susan, you may have to help me here. I know that there were probably about 130 Mexicans killed, and I think we think 19 or 20 Marines and sailors were killed in the action. Yes, sir.
Sir, did the Texas Rangers ever actually move in to try to secure the border towns?
They were very active in the valley. And in fact, that's one of the really sore points in the history of the relationship between the Texas Rangers and the Mexican-American population. They did some pretty bad things. They were afraid, and there was actually a plan, called the Plan of San Diego, which really wasn't an actual plan that was ever going to be in place, but it was a suggestion that the Germans had promised that if Mexico would create an uprising in South Texas, that Texas and California and Arizona would be given back to Mexico. Well, that caused panic. Most of the people in the valley were farmers from the Midwest who had been brought down there by companies that were selling land. So they had no real understanding of Mexico, and they were terrified. And so the Texas Rangers were very active, really up until the 1920s in keeping tabs on things in South Texas. Yes.
Obviously, Veracruz and Tampico are port cities, but apart from that, did they have any strategic value as manufacturing hubs or transportation hubs or shipping hubs, or were they simply easy pickings?
It was a major port, and that part of Mexico has always been key to exporting oil and natural gas and minerals of all kinds that exist in Mexico to this day. They're very valuable. And so Veracruz was the major landing spot. It's the place where Cortez landed. It's the place where the Marines landed in the Mexican War in the 1840s. So it was a vital port city, but it's isolated somewhat. And so it was not particularly right. The revolution is going on at this time. There's fighting all over Mexico. Veracruz had not been really afflicted by the fighting very much. It was kind of trying to keep a low profile. But it was an important city. But it was more important as a symbol, apparently, to the United States that these people needed to be taught a lesson. They were told to salute our flag, and they didn't do it. Yes, sir.
I have a question. My family is, my parents were from Laredo, Texas, and I have a lot of family in the border region. And I've seen, like, the headlines you described during World War I of German spies. If you see during World War II, headlines almost daily about possibility of German spies or spies being at the border in the border towns. We see that being sort of echoed today about terrorists. How much does that have, in your research, been proven true? I mean, were there lots of arrests of spies? Was that or is that just a way to sort of inflame emotions?
That's a good question. Yes, it was a major way to inflame emotions. No question about that. And some people think that there's a possibility that the American military had kind of a sense that they were going to eventually get involved in Europe, and they needed to figure out what they had, what kind of weaponry they had, how did it work, how could they organize the fleet effectively, what could they do with airplanes. And so all of that was probably a part, but they needed something to gin up that interest, and that was the possibility that the Germans were going to be actively involved in Mexico, and suddenly we were going to have German communities along the border and that sort of thing. Now, in World War II, it was a different case altogether. There were German spies in Mexico. They operated out of El Paso, and it's really a fascinating story. There's a really good book called Fetch the Devil, which is about the murder of two American women by what were probably German agents. The father of the women was a German American, and they were trying to force him. He ran an aerospace communications thing in San Francisco, and they were trying to force him to become a spy. And so there's a lot of interest in the role of Germans in Mexico in World War II. World War I, it was not the same. There's the famous Zimmerman telegram. A lot of people think that was a fake telegram from the Germans. The Zimmerman telegram was the offer to Mexicans to rise up and reclaim Texas and Arizona and California. Good question, though. Very interesting.
What was the name of that book in El Paso?
Fetch the Devil. It's really well written and very interesting. Mary Locke.
What about the ship, the German ship that you showed the picture of? Did it really have, did it have armaments that
Yes.
actually came into Veracruz? I mean, was that possibly a legitimate?
It was armaments. They were Remington rifles built by Americans, and the ship simply went down the coast and landed in another port and unloaded the rifles. So that was never stopped. Other questions?
What was for the duration of the occupation after the initial assault, what was the atmosphere like, and how did it unwind, and how did it come to an end?
Well, you're going to see some very interesting pictures in the gallery. Every ship had a baseball team. Every ship had a printing press and a photographer. The Navy was definitely there. You see sailors dancing with young women. You see baseball players. You see boxing matches. They were probably pretty happy to be there, because it was a nice place. And they were, there was not very little actual resistance other than the students from the Naval Academy. And they're celebrated today once a year when the whole city stops and remembers what the naval cadets tried to do. And I think you told me, Susan, you were there one day and there was a whistle when the whole city stopped. So they haven't forgotten it. If you go to Mexico City and you go up the elevator to Chapultepec, the Chapultepec Castle, right at the base of the elevator, there's a big map of North America. And the sections that we call Texas and Arizona and California are all listed as stolen from Mexico in the year that they were stolen. Other questions?
And how did it end? I mean, how did they finally come home?
They just all got on their ships and came home.
Did somebody say?
They marched out. There's a wonderful photograph that you'll see. These two little boys are kind of tagging along as the soldiers leave. Actually, the the Navy and the Marines were the first people to come in, and they were replaced by a very large military Army contingent who flew airplanes, who practiced maneuvers, who were, just used it as a sort of a training ground for the American military for about a year.
Did any indication of the troop presence help the local economy? I mean, were people glad to see them because they're in bars and restaurants and that kind of thing?
Because they were definitely in bars.
I'm sure the bar business and other businesses were. I'm not sure. I doubt it. The whole economy in Mexico was in turmoil. There were regional battles going on everywhere in the north. We all know about Villa. We know about all the regional leaders that were contending, and the economy was kind of put on the back burner. Of course, the economy was basically driven by the hacienda system and by the banking system that was sort of owned by foreigners. And so I think the economy probably stayed pretty much as it had been. Yes?
I find this fascinating, and I intend to get your book, and maybe the answer is in there, but you said this was just a period of a year, right? So are there any anecdotes or interviews of the people from Mexico after they left? Because I know if I had been there, I would be like, what just happened?
I think that's a super question. And Susan, you may be able to answer that better than I.
There were some books written by locals,
Okay.
and I donated them to the library here. So I can't offhand. It's in the back of the book, has sources,
Okay.
and just by reading some of those titles, I can't remember her. It was a woman that wrote the best one, and but I can't remember her name. But it's in the sources. Sorry.
No, thank you.
If you want to get the spirit of Veracruz, sort of at this time, perhaps a little later, go on YouTube and look up a woman named Tonia La Negra. And she has a song called Veracruz, which is an homage, an homenaje to what happened. And she's an extraordinary singer. Tonia La Negra was one of the first Afro-Mexicans to come out as an Afro-Mexican. There were a huge number of slaves introduced into Mexico. And it's right now, it is a movement in Mexico to reclaim the heritage of the Afro-Mexican population. But Tonia La Negra is an extraordinary singer. How are we doing on our time?
I'm sorry to ask so many, but I just have one more. As an expert sort of in 20th century Mexico, do you, in your story in your head, do you see this as part of a pattern? I mean, of course, there's some real obvious patterns that anybody can see, but how do you see this as a pattern of Americans also ready to have a denigratory and an attacking and a possessory feeling for Mexico?
Not just Mexico, the whole of Latin America, we've been involved in their politics in very dramatic ways. In places like Guatemala and Chile, we kind of got a little more sophisticated on how we were going to do regime change. But this may be the first attempt. Rather clumsy. Nobody really. One of the few people who spoke out against it really strongly was William Jennings Bryan. In fact, he resigned. He told Wilson that this was nuts. There was absolutely no reason to stir this up. This racial hatred, this racial fear, and fear of that southern border. And, that's certainly still a topic today. We've got barbed wire and big old walls, and you build an 18-foot wall, and the Mexicans and those people from other parts of South America get a 20-foot ladder, It's a real sticky, difficult problem to this day. Good question. Susan, do you want to add anything?
She's asked this question a couple of times. So can I
Yes.
answer from my about the Ikaronga, the German ship. And it was Remington Arms that had sold these guns. So what they did was route those guns first to Russia and put the guns on a German ship. So it was actually our own company, our own Remington Arms, that was selling the guns to Huerta. But Wilson didn't know that. And so when it's on a German ship coming, Wilson and them were thinking this is Germans bringing guns to Huerta, but it's really us selling.
But us being Remington, not you.
Us being Remington
Yeah.
Arms.
Big distinction.
Yeah, so it's very clever of them.
Wow.
Entrepreneurial.
Entrepreneurial, yeah.
Well, I do hope that you'll enjoy the wonderful range of photographs of this era, beginning with the dancon, and just remember how beautiful those people were. And they were kind of staying out of the revolution, trying to have their own lives, their own peaceful part of Mexico, and suddenly, out of nowhere, the Atlantic Fleet showed up. And they're very interesting photographs.